A black man in a charcoal suit catches every eye in the terminal, not because he's loud or out of place, but because he refuses to shrink. There's an unspoken rule here, carved into polished marble and hushed greetings, that people like him should know their place. Today, he doesn't play along. They smirk. They dismiss him. They think they're putting him in his place. What they don't see is that the cost of that contempt will be measured in billions before the sun rises. This isn't just a story about arrogance meeting its match. It's about the price of forgetting that respect isn't negotiable. Stick around for the twists you won't see coming. Like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what you'd do if it were you. David Carter stepped into the private jet terminal. The polished marble floors reflecting the golden late afternoon light and the silent promise of wealth that oozed from every carefully arranged leather chair and designer lamp. He wore a charcoal suit tailored so precisely it seemed sculpted onto his frame, the silver face of his watch glinting each time he adjusted his cuff. He moved with an ease born of boardrooms and deal tables, but the atmosphere here was different. It was cold in a way money couldn't quite thaw, and the chill had nothing to do with the air conditioning. At the front desk, Trevor was in full performance mode. His hair was slicked to perfection, his teeth gleamed like a marketing ad, and his tone practically purred as he greeted the older white couple in front of David. "Welcome back, Mr. and Mrs. Collingsworth. Always a pleasure to see you." They handed over their tickets, and Trevor treated them like royalty, waving them into the exclusive lounge with an almost servile bow. Then the couple moved aside, and David stepped up. The change in Trevor was immediate. His smile dropped as if someone had cut the strings. He didn't look at David. His eyes slid over him, dismissing him in a heartbeat as though he were the janitor who'd wandered somewhere he didn't belong. He turned to his computer, tapping at the keys with exaggerated concentration, like David wasn't even there. David waited a full 2 seconds before he spoke, his voice calm, professional, but edged with steel. "Good evening. Checking in for the 7:15 executive charter." Trevor didn't look up. "Name?" he asked, flat and disinterested, as if reading from a DMV script. David handed over his premium pass and his ID with deliberate precision. Trevor finally flicked his gaze downward. He took the ticket between 2 fingers, like it might leave a stain on his skin, and didn't bother hiding the smirk that tugged at the corner of his mouth. He turned halfway to his colleague without another word, dangling the ticket loosely. "We'll have to check this. Wait over there." He gestured with his chin toward the corner of the terminal, where the general lounge sat like a punishment cell with scuff chairs and a broken coffee machine. David didn't move. "This ticket includes access to the premium lounge," he said, voice low but firm. Trevor's smirk turned into a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. He rotated the ticket slowly between his fingers before tossing it onto the desk. "These upgrades don't always stick," he said, voice dripping with condescension. The words pronounced carefully, as if David might not understand English. "You'll need to wait over there while I verify." The terminal had gone just quiet enough that a few heads turned. David felt the attention like a physical weight pressing on his shoulders. He exhaled once, slow and controlled, but he didn't move. His gaze locked onto Trevor's face with the kind of measured stare that had sent lesser men babbling apologies in shareholder meetings. "I'll wait here," David said evenly. Trevor's eyes flashed with something meaner. "Sir, the general lounge is down the hall. You're blocking my next guest." He lifted his voice a little, performing for the growing audience. David didn't even blink. "I'll wait here," he repeated. Trevor's jaw clenched. "You people always want special treatment," he muttered, just loud enough. David's fingers tightened around his briefcase handle. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even angry yet. He was calculating. He tilted his head slightly, as if studying Trevor like a new acquisition target that had just revealed its weakest metric. "Is there an actual problem with my reservation?" David asked, voice soft but with an edge like a scalpel. Trevor didn't answer him. Instead, he looked over David's shoulder and smiled at the man behind him in line. "Mr. Hamilton, so sorry for the delay, sir. Come on up." Hamilton was tall, older, with a silver mane and the confident sneer of a man who'd always had doors open for him. He glanced at David with the polite disgust reserved for spilled drinks on a white rug, then sidestepped as if David smelled bad. David didn't move, blocking the line. Trevor's eyes narrowed. "Sir," he said, voice suddenly sharp and cold. "Move to the general lounge now, or I'll have to ask security to assist you." David kept his expression neutral. "Show me where in your policy it says I have to move." Trevor didn't even bother responding. He tilted his head slightly, and the security guard, who'd been leaning against the wall scrolling on his phone, straightened up and walked over. "Problem here," the guard drawled lazily. Trevor didn't miss a beat. "This gentleman doesn't have the correct clearance for this area. He's refusing to move along." The guard's eyes flicked over David, assessing the situation the way a cop sizes up a suspect. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to cooperate." David inhaled once, long and slow, but kept his voice even. "I have a confirmed reservation. First-class access includes this lounge." Trevor let out a short, derisive laugh. "Sure it does." That drew an actual snicker from Hamilton. A woman behind them in line huffed loudly and checked her watch with dramatic irritation. David glanced at her once, memorizing her face without emotion. Then his gaze went back to Trevor, steady as ever. Trevor leaned forward, lowering his voice so only David could hear. "This area is for real VIPs. Don't make this harder." Trevor's tone took on the overly patient edge of someone pretending to be professional while relishing every insult. "Sir, please comply with our instructions," he said in that fake politeness that barely hid his contempt. "You're blocking other guests from checking in." David didn't even glance at the camera phones. He kept his eyes on Trevor's face, voice even. "I'm not blocking anything. I'm standing here waiting for you to confirm my reservation. The reservation I paid for." Trevor let out an exaggerated sigh and rolled his eyes, performing for the crowd. He turned to the guard. "He's refusing to leave the premium area even though his upgrade is probably invalid. He's making our other guests uncomfortable." The guard shifted his weight, settling his gaze on David with the bored irritation of someone used to removing people without asking too many questions. He stepped close enough that David could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Sir," he said in a flat, heavy tone, "I'm going to have to ask you to move along. We can't have any disruptions here. For everyone's comfort." The phrase hit David in the gut like a slap. Everyone's comfort. He knew exactly who everyone was. He could feel the words sparking anger in Grace too, where she stood just behind him with the folder of contracts clutched against her chest. Her jaw worked, but she stayed silent at his subtle shake of the head. He wouldn't let them see him angry. Not yet. Trevor leaned forward over the counter, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Look, buddy, don't make this harder than it has to be. You can wait over there with the rest of our general guests. If there's really an upgrade on your ticket, we'll call you when we're ready. Otherwise, you're wasting everyone's time." David's fingers tightened on the leather handle of his briefcase. The gleaming brass corners of the case felt cold in his grip, an anchor keeping him steady. He spoke slowly, each word delivered like a hammer driving a nail. "I paid for first class. I have every right to wait here. I'm not moving." Trevor blinked once, then leaned back with a nasty little smirk. He didn't bother lowering his voice. "Some people always want what they can't afford," he said, loud enough for the entire line to hear. That drew a few short, awkward laughs from the waiting passengers, though most just turned away, pretending not to watch too, obviously, while they kept their ears open. Grace took half a step forward, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous. You can see the confirmation code right there. He booked this seat weeks ago." Trevor didn't even look at her. He stared at David, refusing to acknowledge the woman talking to him. "I'll check it when I have time," he said lazily, turning back to his screen. "Until then, he can wait over there. If he wants to make a big deal about it, we'll be happy to explain things to the police." The security guard shifted his stance, clearly waiting for David to twitch wrong so he'd have an excuse to put hands on him. David felt the rage boiling in his gut, that hot, sick anger that threatened to rip his carefully constructed calm to shreds. He could see Grace's hands trembling around the folder, her eyes shining with furious helplessness. He forced himself to breathe. He hadn't built his reputation by losing his temper. He'd built it by being smarter than the men who underestimated him. He turned his gaze to Trevor and let the silence hang, heavy and cold, long enough that even the smirk faltered on the attendant's face. He could see the calculations behind Trevor's eyes. He wanted the scene. He wanted the meltdown. He wanted the validation that this man didn't belong here. David wouldn't give it to him. He spoke softly, voice like the edge of a razor. "I'll wait." Trevor's eyebrows rose mockingly. "Sure," he said, dragging the word out with obscene satisfaction. "Stand there all you want. Just don't get in the way of our real customers." That stung Grace enough that she actually made a strangled sound. David reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder, stopping whatever she was about to say. The guard huffed, unimpressed. He settled back on his heels, crossing his arms like a bouncer outside a club. The recording passenger in the trench coat was still filming, trying to look like they weren't. A couple in matching golf jackets were whispering behind their hands, shooting glances at David as if expecting him to turn violent at any second. Grace shifted her weight from foot to foot, her fingers whitening around the folder of contracts she still carried like a lifeline. She leaned toward David and hissed under her breath, "We can leave. We can escalate this with corporate later. You don't have to stand here and take this." David didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on Trevor's hands as they moved over the keyboard. His voice, when it came, was a quiet rasp of determination. "I paid for this lounge. I'm not going anywhere." Grace's nostrils flared as she exhaled, but she nodded once, tightening her grip on the folder. Trevor finished with Jensen, sent him on his way with a bright smile and a flourish, then finally deigned to glance back at David and Grace with a thin smile. "Still here?" he asked, tilting his head to the side. "I told you I'd check the upgrade when I have time." His voice was syrupy and cruel, the words designed to humiliate. Before David could respond, a new voice cut through the hushed space like a gunshot. "What's going on here?" Every head turned. A man in his early 50s, wearing a dark tailored suit with an airline crest on the lapel, was striding across the lounge floor toward the counter. His hair was silver at the temples, his expression carefully composed in the way all executives practiced. Trevor's face lit up with relief and sudden enthusiasm. "Mr. Barrett," he said, his voice suddenly professional and bright. "Glad you're here. We're having a little situation." Barrett's eyes flicked to David, narrowing in an instant. His gaze made a deliberate trip from David's polished shoes up to the perfect Windsor knot at his throat, pausing on his dark skin with an unmistakable flicker of cold assessment. "I see," he said quietly, the words heavy with the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. "Explain." Trevor straightened a little. "This guest is insisting on using the premium lounge without proper clearance," he said crisply. "He's blocking other customers, refusing to cooperate, ignoring staff instructions." David watched Barrett's eyes slide to Trevor's face and then back to his own with flat, assessing disinterest. He waited for the manager to address him. Barrett didn't. Instead, Barrett let his gaze sweep over the room, taking in the watching guests, the security guard, Grace looking furious and defensive. Then he sighed and turned back to Trevor. "Has he shown you any valid confirmation?" Trevor shook his head with the mock exasperation of someone who tried so hard to be patient. "He says he paid for an upgrade. But you know how these comp tickets sometimes don't actually process. The system's busy. I haven't had time to check it." Barrett nodded sagely, eyes thoughtful, as if considering the greatest dilemma in aviation history. Then he turned his full attention to David for the first time. "Sir," he said flatly, "I'm going to have to ask you to move to the general lounge. We need to keep this space comfortable for our real VIPs." Grace actually gasped, her eyes flashing with disbelief. David didn't react. Not immediately. He simply inhaled slowly, a controlled drag of oxygen meant to buy him a heartbeat of calm. Then he met Barrett's eyes with the same steady coldness he used when negotiating cutthroat deals. "You want to check the confirmation code? Or do you want me to spell it out for you?" Barrett didn't blink. "I don't need to check anything," he said in a clipped, patient tone, as if explaining something to a child. We've had problems with these so-called upgrades being claimed by guests who don't understand how the system works. The space is for paying customers who belong here. I'm not going to argue about this in front of other guests." David felt something burn in his chest, slow and hot, but he forced it down. His voice came out low and lethal. "I'm on a trip to finalize a $3.2 billion acquisition. My time is worth more than this entire terminal." For a split second, Trevor's mask of polite disdain cracked, surprise flickering in his eyes. Grace's head snapped toward David, her mouth opening in alarm. Barrett, however, didn't even flinch. A slow smile spread across his face, dripping with condescension, so thick it practically oozed onto the counter. "Sure you are," he said dryly. "And I'm the president. Now back of the line." The words struck the room like a bomb. David didn't move. Grace turned, mouth open as if to scream, but David held up a single finger. She shut her mouth with an audible click, shaking with rage. Barrett straightened, dusting an imaginary speck from his sleeve. "Security," he called with a glance to the guard. "Let's make sure he finds the correct lounge." The guard moved closer, posture shifting subtly into something predatory. David felt the attention from the other passengers sharpen. Phones were out again, some recording, others pretending not to while the glowing screens betrayed them. David shifted his weight, setting his briefcase down gently on the floor at his feet, never breaking eye contact with Barrett. "You're sure you want to do this?" he asked, voice velvet over steel. Barrett's eyebrows lifted with mock surprise. "Do what? Enforce policy?" "Yes, I'm very sure." David didn't react immediately. Instead, he let the silence grow again, let the weight of their words settle on everyone listening. He could feel the attention of the entire terminal drilling into the back of his skull, but he didn't flinch. He let them see him, refusing to move. Grace cleared her throat and managed to speak, though her voice shook with fury she couldn't hide. "He is a premium customer. You have his reservation on file. He has every right to be here." Trevor's head snapped toward her, and his smile thinned into something that wasn't a smile at all. "Little lady, why don't you let the grown-ups talk?" he said smoothly, drawing out the words in a way that made Grace's cheeks burn red. Before Grace could retort, another staff member, a younger attendant with a pinched face and the slightly nervous energy of someone trying to look important, stepped up behind Trevor. She glanced between David and Grace with that brittle, polite terror reserved for anyone who might disturb the rich. "Sir," she said carefully, voice pitched just a little too loud, "I'm going to have to ask you to listen to our staff. You're making other passengers uneasy." David's eyes moved to her face, dark and calm, voice perfectly steady. "By standing here?" The attendant licked her lips and faltered, but Trevor saved her from answering. "Look at this," he said with a soft laugh, turning slightly to the cluster of uniformed staff who'd gathered behind the desk, drawn by the spectacle. "Thinks he's too good to wait in the general lounge with everyone else. Must think he's royalty." The group behind him chuckled low and mean. One of them actually made a mock bow in David's direction, eliciting another ripple of quiet laughter that echoed off the polished walls. David didn't move, didn't blink. He simply kept breathing, the only sign of tension the slight flex and release of his jaw. Grace's fingers had gone white on the folder she still clutched to her chest. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "This is harassment. You're humiliating a paying customer in front of everyone." Trevor's grin didn't waver. "He's doing that himself," he replied cheerfully, standing there like he owns the place. His eyes darted to David's face, challenging him to react. That's when the businessman in the linen jacket, who had checked in before David was stopped, turned from the lounge doors, curiosity flickering over his features before it twisted into something colder. He was mid-50s, hair silvered and combed back with precision, suit crisp even after a long day of travel. He was exactly the kind of man Trevor and Barrett went out of their way to serve. He lifted his voice just enough for everyone to hear, the words delivered with a lazy drawl designed to cut without seeming to. "If he wants a jet so badly," he said with a smirk aimed at Trevor, "maybe he can wash one for us. I'm sure they're hiring." A wave of laughter spread from the staff behind the counter to the couple in line behind David. Trevor actually slapped his hand against the desk, barking an ugly, genuine laugh that revealed the truth behind his careful, professional mask. The younger attendant giggled and immediately tried to smother it with her palm, eyes wide with forced innocence, when David's gaze landed on her. Barrett didn't laugh, but his lips twitched once in what might have been a smirk before he forced his face back to neutral. Grace recoiled like she'd been slapped, letting out a small, horrified sound that died in her throat when David lifted a single hand to silence her without looking her way. He kept his eyes locked on Trevor and the businessman who'd made the joke. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was suffocating. The air conditioning hummed. The low ambient music playing from hidden speakers felt grotesquely out of place, like a fancy restaurant trying to hide the sound of someone being beaten in the back room. The businessman shifted his weight with self-satisfied ease, sniffing once like he'd just corrected a wayward servant. Trevor ran a hand over his hair, satisfied the show had worked. He cleared his throat theatrically and spoke in a voice dripping with false diplomacy. "Sir, this is your last chance to move to the general lounge before security escorts you. We're trying to be polite, but you're disturbing the peace here." He gave that same small smirk to the other staff, confident they were all in on the joke. David let the moment hang. He felt the heat of humiliation pressing in, trying to force him to step back, to shuffle toward the uncomfortable seats with the broken coffee machine and pretend it was all okay. He refused. When he spoke, his voice was so calm it made the laughter die away in uncomfortable silence. "Say it again," he said, barely above a whisper, but clear as crystal in the hush. "Say it again so everyone hears you. Tell me I don't belong here." Grace was the only one who looked at David with anything like humanity. Even her expression was now pained and raw. Her jaw clenched so tight she might have cracked a molar. But even she didn't speak, holding that folder against her chest like a shield, waiting for him to give her permission to intervene again. Trevor, emboldened by the silence that followed his last taunt, turned his attention to the queue behind David and flashed a bright, professional grin as if nothing had happened. He waved forward another man in golf clothes with tanned, wrinkled skin and a platinum watch gleaming on his wrist. "Right this way, Mr. Harris," Trevor said, and the man glided past David without even a glance. Harris was given the red carpet greeting, complete with hushed tones and a complimentary bottle of water Trevor handed over with a flourish. As Harris walked through the premium lounge doors, he glanced back just once at David, eyes flat and amused, before the doors whooshed closed with a smug hush that seemed to punctuate the division between us and them. David's lips didn't move, but his eyes tracked the entire performance, cool and unblinking. Trevor turned back, rolling his eyes theatrically for the benefit of the other staff, who tittered quietly behind the counter. "You still here?" he said finally, loudly enough for everyone in the front lobby to hear. "Figured you'd be gone by now. Don't you have, I don't know, a bus to catch?" The words were calculated, cutting, and designed for an audience. A low ripple of laughter spread from the people pretending to wait patiently behind David to the staff who didn't even bother to hide their smirks. Grace took a shuddering breath beside him. Her lips moved silently, rehearsing arguments, apologies, demands she never got to say because David didn't so much as turn his head to acknowledge her. Trevor's grin widened. He let the silence stretch before adding, "Seriously though, you're blocking the line. It's bad enough you're refusing to leave, but now you're holding up real customers." He flicked his eyes deliberately toward the security guard, who crossed his arms over his chest and shifted just a little closer, feet planted wide. David's jaw worked, the muscle jumping, but his voice when it came was calm enough to draw an uncomfortable hush from the onlookers who had started to titter. "Check. The reservation." 3 words, crisp and sharp, like ice cracking on a lake. Trevor blinked once, the grin faltering, before returning in full force. He made a big show of leaning forward over the counter. "Tell you what," he said, voice dripping with condescension, "even if your precious upgrade went through, which, big if, I still wouldn't let you into our bar. We don't do charity pours." That hit like a slap in the face. The laughter was immediate and ugly, this time from the staff behind him and even a few customers in line who had clearly decided the social contract didn't require subtlety anymore. Grace physically recoiled, the folder pressed tight against her ribs like she was trying to keep her heart from falling out of her chest. She opened her mouth, but Trevor cut her off with a single, raised hand. No, don't even start. If you're with him, you can wait with him. I don't have time to deal with your friend's sob story. Her mouth snapped closed. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She swallowed hard enough to make her throat click. David didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed on Trevor's face, dark and heavy and promising a reckoning that had nothing to do with yelling or fists. Trevor must have sensed it because he leaned back slightly, but his smirk didn't fade. He tilted his head to the side like he was studying a zoo animal. Awfully quiet now, huh? Grace finally found her voice, raw and trembling. We have the paperwork, she said, lifting the folder just a fraction. We can prove it. Just let us show you. Trevor's eyes slid over her, dismissive and ugly. Paperwork. He mimicked surprise so badly it was practically a cartoon. What is this, a welfare office? You going to show me your food stamps? A collective gasp went through the room. Even Barrett winced. But he didn't intervene. He didn't say a word. The security guard didn't move, only flicked his eyes between David and Trevor like he was hoping someone would swing so he could justify grabbing them. David still didn't move. Grace's hand dropped to her side, the folder thumping against her thigh. Her shoulders shook once, twice, as she fought to keep her composure. She tried again, voice smaller. He's a premium client. He's your customer. He has a right to be here. Trevor's smile turned sharp enough to cut. Is he your client or your boyfriend? The words oozed mock innocence, but the underlying venom was clear to everyone in earshot. Not that it matters. You're both waiting outside. You want me to get you a blanket while you sit in the general lounge? His eyes darted to the staff behind him, inviting them to laugh along. And they did. Grace choked on a sob she couldn't hold back, turning her head away so they wouldn't see the tears spilling down her cheeks. But everyone saw. The silence that fell afterward wasn't respectful. It was satisfied. The way silence often is after the executioner drops the blade and the crowd leans in to watch the blood pool. David's breathing was controlled, forced, each inhale and exhale deliberate. His eyes bored into Trevor with an expression so flat and cold it was like looking into deep water at night. Impossible to tell how far down it went. Grace turned back to him, desperate. David, she whispered, voice breaking. Please. Let's just go. Please. But David didn't look at her. He kept his gaze on Trevor. The words he spoke were so quiet Grace almost didn't hear them. No, Trevor let out a short bark of laughter. No. You're seriously still going to stand there? After all this? David's jaw worked once, twice, then settled. His voice was calm. Yes. Trevor's eyebrows shot up. He barked another laugh. God. Unbelievable. He turned deliberately to Barrett, who had been pretending to study something on his tablet and failing to hide his satisfied smirk. You see what I'm dealing with here? Trevor asked, voice pitched high with mock exasperation. You see why we have to keep standards up around here? It's for everyone's comfort. Barrett didn't look at David. He just nodded once. Wrap it up, he said to Trevor, voice dismissive, like he was talking about taking out the trash. Trevor leaned back against the polished counter, tapping one foot against the brass rail with infuriating casualness, as if David's continued presence was merely an annoyance to be swatted away with enough practiced disinterest. The silence between them stretched until it felt like the walls were closing in. Finally, Trevor pushed himself off the counter and glanced at Barrett, whose mouth tightened into something between boredom and amusement. Trevor jerked his chin at David and spoke in a voice loud enough for the entire room to hear, making sure every watching phone captured it in crystal clarity. All right, enough, he said, tone dripping with forced patience. Let's be clear. I'm not checking you in. I'm refusing your boarding. You're officially a security concern. The words landed like a slap, their false civility more insulting than any outright slur. Grace inhaled sharply beside David, a broken gasp that turned into a hiss of disbelief. Her eyes went wide, her mouth working for words. "You can't do that," she finally spat, voice ragged, trembling with outrage and despair. "He paid. He has the paperwork. We have confirmation. You can't just refuse him boarding." Trevor didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed on David's face, cold and gloating. "Sure I can," he said easily. "You're making my staff uncomfortable. You're disturbing other passengers. And now you're refusing to follow direct instructions. That's a security threat. Policy's real clear about it." Grace turned to Barrett, pleading now, voice cracking. "You can't be serious. This is illegal. It's blatant discrimination. We'll sue. We'll ruin you." Barrett finally lifted his eyes from the tablet he'd been pretending to read, meeting her gaze without a flicker of emotion. He shrugged, one shoulder lifting in a slow, dismissive roll. "Do what you want," he said simply. "Our first priority is safety. We have the right to deny boarding to anyone we consider disruptive." Grace let out a strangled sound that was half laugh, half sob, tears sliding freely now down her cheeks. She turned back to David, voice dropping to a whisper that vibrated with fury and heartbreak. "We can sue them. David, we can own them. Please. Let's just leave. Let's go. Please." But David didn't move. He didn't speak. His eyes were locked on Trevor's face with a coldness that made even the smirk slip just slightly. He didn't even blink when Trevor leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to make it sound like they were co-conspirators, though the words were calculated to carry. "Listen," Trevor said softly. "You're embarrassing yourself. You don't belong here. You think money makes you one of them? It doesn't. Go home. Don't make this worse." Grace's sobs broke the silence like glass underfoot. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, trying to stifle them, shoulders shaking so violently the folder slipped from her grip and landed with a dull slap against the floor. Papers spilled in a fan around her feet, contracts worth billions scattered like trash on the airport floor. She didn't even try to pick them up. David didn't look down at the mess, didn't look at Grace, didn't look at the security guard who had taken 2 menacing steps closer, the fingers of one hand flexing like he was itching for an excuse. His eyes stayed locked on Trevor's, and when he spoke, his voice was low and terrible in its control. "Is that your final answer?" Trevor snorted, leaning back, crossing his arms. "Final answer? What is this, a game show?" "Yeah, that's my answer. You're not flying. Not on my watch." Barrett nodded, confirming it with the tone of a man who couldn't be bothered to pretend anymore. "It's settled. He's not boarding this flight." Grace whimpered beside David, a soft, broken noise that sounded like someone dying inside. She bent and began gathering the papers with trembling hands, the sound of them sliding across the marble floor harsh in the dead silence. And that was when the pilot arrived. He was a tall man in his 50s, with the easy swagger of someone who'd seen too much to be impressed by anything. His uniform was immaculate, the silver wings on his chest shining under the terminal lights. He paused as he approached, taking in a tableau. David standing frozen, Grace sobbing on her knees, papers spread around her, Trevor smirking at the counter, Barrett checking his watch. David didn't say a word. Instead, he did something that confused them all. He calmly set his briefcase on the ground next to his feet, reaching inside his jacket with a controlled slowness that made the security guard tense, hand going halfway to the baton on his belt. But David only pulled out his phone. He didn't bother unlocking it with a fingerprint or code. It was already waiting on the screen he needed. He lifted it to his ear and turned slightly away from them, giving them his shoulder like they were beneath notice. For a beat, the only sound was the click of Grace's teeth as she fought to keep them from chattering, and the low hush of the HVAC humming overhead. Then David spoke, calm, precise, clipped. The voice of a man who had spent years negotiating mergers, dismantling empires, building new ones in his name. "It's me," he said, the 2 words so soft the entire terminal strained to hear them anyway. Trevor snickered, looking around at the staff behind the counter, who were watching with open amusement now, eyes wide with anticipation of the final humiliation. "Listen to this," he mouthed, barely bothering to hide it. Barrett didn't even pretend to pay attention anymore. He was checking his email on his tablet. David kept talking, voice steady as granite. "Yes, I need you to hold the acquisition." A pause. A slow blink. The staff's laughter faltered, confused now. Trevor's grin slipped a fraction. Grace froze completely, eyes wide, mouth hanging slightly open as she clutched the folder to her chest like it might keep her from falling apart. "Yes," David said again, not looking at any of them. "I'm aware of the impact. I don't care. Put it on hold. No, not for a day. Indefinitely." Trevor's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The security guard shifted from foot to foot, eyes darting from David's back to Barrett's stiff posture. Grace's lips moved silently, trying to form words that wouldn't come. David didn't stop, didn't even slow down. "Tell legal I want full disclosure prepared by tomorrow morning. Notify the board that I will be calling an emergency session at 9 a.m. Yes, all of them. No, I don't care if they're in Europe. They'll answer." He turned just enough so they could see the glint in his eyes, a glimmer like cold steel under bright lights. "If they have questions, tell them to look at the charter contract. Section 14, breach of terms. They'll understand." Grace made a tiny noise, something like a breath sucked in too sharply, and took half a step back. Her legs hit the edge of a chair she hadn't realized was there, and she dropped into it bonelessly, clutching the folder to her chest. Her eyes were huge and wet and locked on David's face. She looked like she was seeing him for the first time. Trevor swallowed audibly, the sound weirdly loud in the silence. He tried to sneer again, but it came out strained. "What, you gonna sue us now? You think you can scare me with your big talk?" David lowered the phone, pressing the red button with the slow, deliberate finality of a man hanging up a coffin lid. He turned to face them all, sweeping the room with a gaze that felt like a blade drawn across skin. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he spoke, his words cut the air in half. "I don't need to sue you," he said. "I am you." David didn't need to shout. He didn't need to threaten. He had dropped the truth like a guillotine blade, and everyone in that terminal had heard the final thud. Slowly, methodically, he picked up his briefcase, never once breaking eye contact with Trevor, who flinched like he expected a punch that would never come. David adjusted his tie with clinical precision, the movement so calm it was insulting, then turned to Grace. He extended one hand toward her, palm up, and after a second's hesitation, she placed the folder in it without a word. She wiped at her eyes again with the heel of her hand, smearing makeup but not caring anymore. David turned and walked toward the glass doors that led out of the premium lounge, the doors sliding open with an eager hush, as if desperate to be useful now. Grace scrambled to her feet and hurried after him, her heels clicking wildly against the marble. She didn't look back. The doors closed behind them with a whisper that felt like the slamming of a coffin lid. The silence that settled over the terminal was brutal and unkind. Trevor let out a shuddering breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, the sound wet and ugly in the hush. Barrett pressed his lips into a bloodless line and finally turned on his heel, muttering something about needing to make calls. The staff behind the counter all seemed to find very important tasks to focus on, no one meeting anyone else's gaze. But the moment didn't end there. The phones had recorded everything. Every insult, every smirk, every dismissal. The passenger in the designer trench coat who had been so gleefully filming before uploaded the video before he even boarded, complete with a mocking caption he thought would get a laugh. Instead, it got shared, and shared again, and shared again. By the time David and Grace reached the black town car idling at the curb, phones across the country were buzzing with notifications. By the time they pulled away from the terminal, the first news alerts were already hitting screens. By the time David sat back against the leather seat and let out a long, controlled exhale, a headline had already been drafted and published. Discriminatory behavior sinks $3.2 billion jet deal. The video was brutal. Trevor's voice was crisp and clear, telling David to go wait with the rest of the general crowd. The words "charity pours" and "some people always want what they can't afford" played on a loop with subtitles. Barrett's calm dismissal about real VIPs was there, too, right alongside the pilot's offhand comment about those people making other passengers uncomfortable. It was perfect, damning, unavoidable. By the time David's car reached his hotel suite, the airline stock was down 7% in after-hours trading. A CNBC segment ran with the churn $3.2 billion acquisition halted over racist incident, showing looping B-roll of sleek jets on tarmacs, juxtaposed with the shaky phone footage of Trevor's smirk dissolving into horror when David dropped his final revelation. Grace sat opposite him in the car, silent, the folder clutched against her chest once more. She didn't speak until the car slowed at a red light, the city's glow bleeding in through tinted windows. Then she let out a single, broken laugh that cracked under its own weight. "Jesus, David," she whispered. "They're going to burn for this." David didn't respond. He didn't need to. He stared out the window at the city rolling by, the reflections of the news alerts flashing across skyscrapers. He could feel the power moving, the lines of influence shifting under his fingers like chess pieces. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was petty. This was about justice, and making sure they could never pretend this didn't happen. By dawn, the story was everywhere. CNN ran the headline in bold white letters over a red banner. Racist incident causes $3.2 billion deal TO collapse. Financial analysts on Bloomberg shook their heads grimly at the loss in market cap, the breach of contract penalties, the board's emergency meeting already in progress. Hashtags trended worldwide. Hashtag jet privilege. Hashtag fly while black. Hashtag real VIPs. Major clients began quietly, then not so quietly, pulling their contract with the airline. Luxury bronze demanded statements. Corporate travel agencies announced they would reevaluate their partnerships. Stock tickers scrolled red. Investors panicked. Board members tried to call David directly, but his assistant, Grace, who had cleaned herself up, replaced her bun, and met every call with perfect cutting politeness, told them simply, "He's not taking calls at this time. You'll be notified if he chooses to meet." David watched in silence, fingers steepled in front of his mouth, eyes unblinking. Grace kept her gaze fixed on the screen, the corner of her mouth twitching once in something that might have been grim satisfaction. On the screen, the PR official beside Trevor shifted uncomfortably, reaching for the mic. "We will be taking no further questions at this time," she announced, voice brittle as a cracking plate. But the damage was done. Trevor tried to blurt something else, voice shrill and cracking. It was taken out of context. Click. The camera cut to another angle, showing him being gently but unmistakably pulled away from the podium by two security staff in navy suits, who kept their eyes blank as they escorted him through the sea of flashing bulbs and shouted questions. One reporter shouted, "Fired yet?" and Trevor's face twisted, tears standing in his eyes before he could turn away from the cameras. Grace let out a long, slow exhale. "That's one." David didn't answer. Elsewhere, in a polished oak-paneled boardroom filled with men and women in dark suits and graying hair, the airline's board of directors sat in staggered rows of tension, each glued to their tablets, as news tickers scrolled the same catastrophic headlines. $3.2 deal canceled after racial incident. Airline CEO to face board today. Stock crash continues. The CEO, a man in his early 60s with impeccable hair and a carefully cultivated air of unflappable authority, stood at the head of the room, gripping the back of his chair so hard his knuckles gleamed. His voice shook despite all his experience. "I told them to handle it quietly. That was my directive. Calm him down. Apologize if we had to." One board member with sharp cheekbones and steely eyes cut in coldly. They didn't apologize. They mocked him. They went viral. And now our valuations down 22% in 48 hours. Another spoke up, voice cracking with frustration. "Do you have any idea how many charter contracts we lost overnight? Our international partners are threatening lawsuits. The holding company that charters half our fleet just invoked breach of contract clauses." The CEO dragged a hand over his face, the professional mask slipping. "I didn't know it was him. No one told me." He tried to muster the old authority, voice rising. "Look, I can fix this. I'll call him personally. I'll apologize. We can still salvage." The first board member cut him off. "He's not answering your calls. He doesn't need your apology. He owns us now." The words hung in the boardroom like a death sentence. Another member closed her tablet with a deliberate snap. This isn't about a mistake anymore. This is a pattern. The investigation team found 6 other formal complaints in the last year. Same staff, same terminal, same standards. You buried them. The CEO's mouth dropped open, but no words came out. David sat back in his chair in his own conference room, listening as Grace read the leaked meeting transcript in a dry, professional voice, each word a nail in the coffin. She didn't look up when she finished. She didn't need to. The silence between them was the only answer required. Across the country, the news coverage became a feeding frenzy. Every network ran the phone footage in slow motion, pausing on Trevor's wink, zooming in on his smile as he mocked charity pours, transcribing Barrett's cold dismissal about real VIPs, playing and replaying the pilot's drawled "those people" line until it became a rallying cry. Social media erupted with hashtags that refused to fade. Hashtag not your lounge. Hashtag fly while black. Hashtag privilege grounded. Late night hosts mocked it ruthlessly. Meme pages flooded timelines with side-by-side photos of Trevor's smirk and the stock chart nose diving like a doomed jet. Investors held emergency meetings at dawn, cutting losses, shifting assets, screaming at assistants to sell, sell, sell before the bloodbath got worse. Corporate clients issued formal statements, severing relationships. One foreign government announced it would reevaluate its multi-million-dollar maintenance contract. David's holding company issued a brief, scathing statement. "We will be re-evaluating all partnerships with vendors who cannot meet our ethical standards." The months that followed were a slow, relentless unraveling of everything the airline's leadership thought untouchable. The stock didn't just fall, it cratered. Its value sliced away with every passing headline, every new video clip that re-emerged on social media to remind the world exactly how cheap and mean their so-called standards had been. Major corporate partners canceled their contracts one by one in a steady drumbeat of formal letters and press releases, each carefully worded to protect themselves while making clear they were appalled by what had happened. International tourism boards withdrew sponsorships. The airline's CEO, replaced with a hastily promoted executive from compliance, scrambled to hold what was left together with public apologies, new training initiatives, and promises to do better. But the words sounded hollow when spoken by men who hadn't even blinked during those humiliating minutes in the terminal. David didn't watch the damage for pleasure. He didn't let it become some nightly entertainment, didn't toast every lost contract or panic meeting. He watched it the way a surgeon watches an infection drain from a wound, necessary and ugly, but ultimately healing. Grace remained at his side, promoted now to senior partner on the aviation portfolio. She carried herself with a new confidence that hadn't existed before that day at the terminal, her voice cutting through calls with the calm assurance of someone who knew exactly what it meant to be underestimated and refused to let it happen again. But the incident, the day that had changed everything, never really went away. Even as they moved on to other deals, other crises, the footage lived online, ready to resurface with every new corporate scandal about bias and discrimination. David never took it down or tried to hide it. He wanted it there, a reminder, a warning. It was raining the afternoon Trevor showed up unannounced at the corporate offices. He didn't get past the lobby at first. Security recognized him instantly. His face had been everywhere, frozen in that ugly sneer, mouth half open around some cutting remark he would give anything to unsay. The guard called upstairs, voice low and wary. "Mr. Carter, he says he's here to see you. Says it's personal." Grace looked at David, waiting for a nod or a dismissal. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he let out a slow breath. "Send him up." Trevor came into the executive conference room dripping with rain, hair plastered to his forehead, suit too big on him, like it had been borrowed for a job interview he was doomed to fail. His eyes were hollow in a way no headline could capture, skin sallow, cheeks sunken. He carried no arrogance anymore, no defensive sneer, just something that looked a lot like shame. He held his cheap messenger bag to his chest like a shield before realizing how pathetic it looked and letting it fall at his side. David sat at the head of the polished table, fingers steepled in front of his mouth, Grace on his left flipping through notes on her tablet with pointed disinterest. Trevor didn't speak at first. The silence was so long it was painful. Finally, his voice cracked as he tried to force words out. "I know you don't want to see me. I wouldn't blame you if you kicked me out right now." David said nothing. Trevor's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. I lost everything. The airline obviously fired me on the spot. No one else in aviation would touch me. Not with my name, my face. His voice broke on that word, and he closed his eyes, dragging a shaking hand over his forehead. "I deserve it," he whispered. Grace's expression didn't change. Trevor took a halting step forward. I did some volunteer work. It was that or starve. Food banks, community centers, shelters. I didn't do it because I'm a good person. I did it because I didn't have anything else. And I heard a lot of people tell their stories. Heard kids ask me why things are the way they are, why people hate them before they know them. And I realized," he choked on the words, swallowing hard. "I realized how ugly I'd become." He lowered his head, shoulders shaking. The silence was thick and uncomfortable. Finally, in a voice that was just a hoarse rasp, he finished. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything. I just wanted to tell you to your face. I'm sorry for what I did to you, for what I was. I'm so sorry." David didn't speak immediately. He let the words hang between them, let the silence grow heavy enough to crush them both. Grace shifted in her chair, her jaw working, eyes locked on David's profile. Finally, he lowered his hands to the table and sat back slightly. His voice was low and calm. "Good," he said simply. Trevor's head snapped up, eyes wet, confusion twisting his face. "What?" David exhaled slowly. "Good that you're sorry. Good that you learned something. That's the only reason I didn't have security throw you back out on the street the second you walked in." Trevor's lip trembled. "I don't expect you to forgive me." David shook his head once. "It doesn't matter what you expect. It matters what you do next." He leaned forward, fingers steepled again. "You were a part of something that humiliated people every day. You didn't just enforce a policy. You enjoyed it. You liked the power. That's the truth. Don't deny it." Trevor swallowed and nodded, tears rolling down his cheeks unchecked. "Yes, I did." David let the moment sit. Then he spoke, voice quieter but somehow sharper. "You don't get to erase that, but you get to do better. You get to make sure you never do it again. You get to help others see it too. Or you don't. That's your choice." Trevor wiped his face with the back of his hand, breathing ragged. "I will. I swear to God. I will." David sat back, eyes cold but no longer murderous. He nodded once. "Then go." Trevor hesitated, as if waiting for something else, punishment, forgiveness, he didn't even know. When nothing came, he turned and walked out of the room, shoulders hunched like a man carrying his own coffin. Grace let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "That's it." David closed his eyes briefly. That's all it ever is. Later that year, David announced the creation of a new foundation, seeded with a portion of the $3.2 billion deal money he'd clawed back when the acquisition finally went through under his terms. The foundation funded anti-bias training for the aviation industry, real training, not the one-hour PowerPoint jokes corporations used to check boxes. It offered scholarships for marginalized students who wanted to work in aerospace engineering, piloting, logistics. It created programs to support first-time travelers from underrepresented backgrounds, to make sure the idea of belonging in first class wasn't just a sales slogan, but a reality. When reporters asked why he did it, David didn't offer them an easy quote. He just shrugged. "We all have to be better," he said. And he meant it. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want more gripping narratives like it, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to know what you thought about this plot. Did the twists keep you hooked? Which moment hit you the hardest? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country. I'd love to see how far this community reaches. Let's talk about it.